Hello everybody. This is a presentation from Possibility Wave and is part 3 of a larger series. This series is entitled The Signal Encoding Theory and Biofeedback. This part 3 is divided into 2 segments. This is segment number 1. Segment number 2 will be available as a separate but related presentation. I'm Garnet Dupuis. I'm your presenter. I'm the co-founder and creative designer of Possibility Wave. I'm very happy and proud of that, proud of the whole project and the entire team. Right now I'm speaking to you from my home in northern Thailand. I'm up in the mountain rainforest. It's early morning. We've had a little bit of rain during the night, so it's a very moist and beautiful beginning to a brand new day. If you want to connect with us on an ongoing basis, the simplest way is to go to a website, possibilitywave.com, all one word, possibilitywave.com. The site itself will be evolving, no doubt. Anytime you wish, just connect. Thank you. This is a large presentation entitled The Signal Encoding Theory and Biofeedback. And for some of you, this may be the first connection, the first experience of the presentation, or for others, maybe, and I hope, you've already had the chance to experience part 1 and part 2. As a review, or perhaps as clarification if you're new, the presentation does have 4 parts. The first part is entitled The Boundaries of Belief. The second, Compassionate Communication. The third, which is this one, is the Energy Encoding of Signals. And part number 4, which follows, is the Information Encoding of Signals. So 4 parts. They are designed to be experienced in sequence. If possible, I'd advise it. But you can go back and forth or pick and choose. There are references to former concepts in later parts. So if it's unclear and you jumped in at some point, you may want to go back to experience the earlier ones or perhaps have a review. A little bit of detail. The boundaries of belief. Oh, it's the gatekeeper. The fact that we have belief systems and how these belief systems affect our understandings. What is, I don't know, there's so many ways of, what's so critically important is that much of our belief system is really not even clear to us. We just take it to be reality. And that filter affects everything that we experience. So the boundaries of belief is part 1. Part 2, the compassionate communication, the nature of communication itself. The fact that the title has compassion linked with communication is provocative. And it establishes one of the heart foundations of how Possibility Wave approaches everything that it does. Here we are, number 3, the Energy Encoding of Signals. And this really explores how applied energy processes can be used to tease out the information characteristics of different items, and how we can go along a process of creating enduring signals using these applied energy processes. That's this part. That's what we're going into shortly. Number 4, information encoding. This is how it's possible to use what we term pure information to end up creating information codes, end up creating signals for different uses. Okay, let's begin. This is part 3, segment number 1. There are 2 segments in this part. This is segment number 1. Let's have a look at the energy encoding of signals. I have to reflect back right now as a reminder, something that we made as a point in previous parts of this series. The whole issue of energy, the term, the concept of energy. We did our best to clarify that, and I'd like to remind you of that as we go into this large part 3, because of the extensive use of the term and concept energy. Here at Possibility Wave, we try to keep it clear. We try to keep it simple. You know, the term energy is, it's just everywhere. And the way that it's used seems to encompass, just, I don't know, like unending different processes and experiences. So here at Possibility Wave and in this presentation, when the term energy is used, it refers to a rather standard scientific concept. We're talking about electromagnetism, and we're talking about mechanical vibration, the kind that you would typically experience as sound. So energy here is kind of put into this box, I guess some would say. We're trying to not complicate the discussion, the learning experience, by also broadening this into the challenging areas of what we can call subtle energy. If this is something that you'd like to clarify further, I would advise you to go back to earlier parts in this presentation, part number 1 and part number 2. Here we are. This whole presentation, this whole series in 4 parts, we're exploring the whole issue of signal encoding in biofeedback at a theoretical level. What do I mean by signal encoding? Let's think of it as fundamentally incorporating 3 aspects or 3 steps that are all interrelated. The first is the identifying of the information characteristics. Identify. The second is then taking what has been identified and in some way encoding or translating or expressing this in a manner that then becomes useful to us, repetitively useful, faithfully useful. And then the third step is taking this encoded information characteristics and storing them in such a way that we can use them repeatedly, again and again in a variety of ways. Because once we store them, as opposed to having them occur in the fleeting moment of the here and now, once we store them, once we've had them encrypted in such a way that they persist, then we can use these information codes over and over again in all sorts of fashions for all sorts of needs, things like assessment and stimulations, but beyond that we can use them in processes of analysis, a variety of reinforcements. We can even take them and modify them so that they express themselves in different ways according to the medium. You can have them as sound vibrations. You can have them as light or photonic stimulations. You know, different forms of electromagnetics. It's quite a broad range of potentials that you have. But to get there, following these 3 steps, you know, what I would say encapsulates the meaning and intent of signal encoding. is to identify, encode, and store the information characteristics of an item. So when we refer to signal encoding in the signal encoding theory and biofeedback, that's what we mean. A little review. It's good to refresh basic concepts, and especially if by chance you've not had the chance to experience the learning presented in Part 1 and Part 2. A little peek as a review, basic concepts. This first one is the keystone of possibility wave in its view, in its belief, and consequently in its design of information-coded biofeedback tools. The first point is that awareness is the fundamental matrix of reality. Awareness is the fundamental matrix of reality. Part number 1, the boundaries of belief, really goes deep into this exploration and this appreciation. And from this point number 1, that awareness is the fundamental matrix of reality, we are then taken openly into the issue of consciousness and recognizing that all the varied forms of consciousness, and I don't know, who knows how many variations and types of consciousness there are, extensive in the minimum, that all of these varied states of consciousness, these are modulations of awareness. They're not different than awareness, they are awareness, but they're awareness morphing and expressing and, I don't know, dancing into itself in all sorts of ways, but never ever losing its fundamental nature, which is awareness itself. So consciousness, all the varied states are modulations of awareness. And to extend this key concept, what's information? What's energy? What's matter? Well, from this point of view, we could say, and I would declare this as a definition, a possibility wave definition, that information is the intelligence aspect of awareness. I know these are just words, trying to capture something. That's the best shot at a definition. That information is the intelligence aspect of awareness, and that energy, following the same line of thinking, energy is the activity aspect of awareness, and matter, that which has mass, matter is the form aspect of awareness. So it is awareness. Awareness is, and as it is, just as it is, it can modulate into all the forms of consciousness. It can express itself in an intelligent manner as information, the guiding principles. The activity that we label energy, and the form that the mass of matter expresses. Basic concepts. To peel the onion just a little bit more on this review of basic concepts, we have a term at Possibility Wave. The term is the I field. And I field is short for information field. You could think of the information field as the subset of awareness. You know, the word field is being used more and more and more now. I was raised a farm boy, and I knew what a field meant. It was 5 acres or 10 acres, and whether I had to go plow it or take a hoe and go weed up and down the rows of soybeans, that was a field. These days, field out of physics has taken on a whole new meaning or connotation. You know, the classic description is that there is some agent, and the activity of that agent expresses itself in and around the agent. That domain of expression or effect from the agent is called the field. So in this case, following that kind of, I don't know, clunky but still adequate description, the agent here is awareness, and the area of effect, the field, what we here call the information field, is infinite. There's no way of putting a boundary on it. So the information field, the I field, is the infinite field of effect from this agent we call awareness. Kind of funny to use these words. This next point, which was made in the earlier parts of this series, this is a challenging one, hard to conceptualize because we are so comfortably habituated in our sensory experiences of space and time. The concept is that the I field permits instantaneous access to all information everywhere simultaneously. Boy, there are some real punchy words in there. Instantaneous, everywhere, simultaneously. A point of contemplation, undoubtedly. It really requires a kind of a relaxing of the thought process and an opening of the mind to even begin to approach what all of this entails, what it means, what the implications are. Following this statement, that the I field permits the instantaneous access to all information everywhere simultaneously, permits all sorts of other appreciations. One of them being that information is not transmitted, nor does it travel in space. It simply manifests. And these are almost like Zen koans or something like that. You could take a line like this and sit in contemplation, which I hope you might do. And it takes us all the way back, right into the beginning of part one, where we were looking at our axioms. Remember what an axiom is. Fundamentally, it's a self-evident truth that does not require proof. I think an axiom like that, although we're stuffed full of them like a turkey at Thanksgiving with axioms, the better appreciation of the usefulness of an axiom is that you recognize that you have it as a belief, that you think it's self-evident, that you've not required proof to get there, but that you use it as a model to test. Frankly, that's what Siddhartha Buddha proposed that we all do, to test our belief systems. An untested axiom ends up in dogma, but a tested axiom can end up in discovery. So, this statement that information is not transmitted, nor does it travel in space, it simply manifests, links directly to the statement before, that the I field permits the instantaneous access to all information everywhere simultaneously. Explore that. I don't know how else to say that these are profound game changers. Okay, now, verbs are tricky. Before we move on to the technical aspects, I want you to consider this. This doesn't necessarily hold so equally true, apparently, in every language. I was speaking to some newfound Chinese friends, some very wonderful people. I hope you have the chance to meet someday through us. And we were, I was scratching my head over the fact that the verb to be and the verb to have don't really have the same expressed intent or meaning in the Chinese language as in most of the Western languages that I'm aware of. So anyway, for those of us that speak English and similar languages, French and Italian and on, what I want you to do here is to be very sensitive to the verb that's used in a statement. Here I request that you have a look and consider the verb to be and the verb to have, and how they are evidence of two very significant and different points of view regarding reality. Yeah, I know. This could be reduced to just like a segue into semantics, but that's not my purpose here. Why am I looking at this? Because I think it focuses in on a critical concept. And if we stumble at this level of concept, things later will be made more difficult, if not become confusing. So I'm asking us for a moment to have a look at the verb to be and the verb to have. Information is the intelligence aspect of awareness. I've already made that point, I guess, repeatedly. Information does not have awareness. It is awareness expressing itself as information. You see, if you frame it up this way, it's kind of like in poker, a tell. It's a give of a position that you're taking, an axiom that you have. If you say that it has, the verb to have, it means that there is this something, let's call it awareness, or this whatever. Oh, there is awareness and there is information, and one has the other. Well, what is it? Already what you've done is you've created the foundation for dualism. And if there are two things, one is awareness, one is information, one has the other, then you have to go into this black forest, so easy to get lost, of, well, if one has the other, what is the nature of one that is different than the nature of the other? And what's the mechanism by which they can interact? And if it has, then can it lose? And it goes on and on and on. And you have all of these essentially confusing and potentially unanswerable questions. And the questions don't have answers because the questions themselves are infected with a confusion from the beginning. So here, awareness always is. Watch this as we proceed with this presentation. Watch this as you think and reflect on your own boundaries of belief, your belief system, your axioms, and see if this can help avoid confusion. Critical concept number 2 builds on this first concept. It follows the same idea that the energy, because this whole part, right, part number 3, focuses on the energy encoding approach in creating information codes, energy. So energy is the activity aspect of awareness. As awareness, energy does not have information. It is the information manifesting as activity. Try to resist breaking things apart conceptually and then convincing yourself that the conceptual separation that you made as a way of analyzing is actually a representation of the real thing. You know, having spent a good amount of time in wellness and healthcare education throughout my life, one of the examples of this is when you look at, let's say, human body, human being, and you try to understand how the body functions. Well, you know, we classically break it down into different systems. Oh, there is the respiratory system, and there is the circulatory system, and then we try to figure out how they can interact or connect, which is not bad. It's a reductionistic approach, but you have to be cautious to not fall into the swoon to believe that they're actually separate systems. You know, the interaction of the heart and the lungs is a unified single process that is not one system and relating to another system. So using, you know, anatomy and physiology here as an analogy, in this case, let's not somehow create this artificial mental empire where there are all of these objects and they have name tags. One is awareness, one is consciousness, one is information, one is energy, one is matter as expressed in mass. Let's not do that to ourselves. Let's recognize that. Another image, another analogy. Imagine you have a blanket, big blanket. You can roll it in a ball, you can fold it flat, you can lay it in sort of like a big bunch to make a mountain, or stick a pole under it to make a tent for your kid. Whatever you do with it will have a different expression, a different appearance, maybe even a different use. It's still the same blanket. Okay, to try using more analogies. I've always loved analogies because although they tend to lose something in their translation, they still usually, and that's the intention of analogy, they carry the principle, they carry the critical concept along with them. So here's an analogy. It's not exact, but as I say here, I hope you get the idea. There's an image on the screen if you're looking at the PowerPoint. Here you see the life cycle of an insect. And if you looked at the egg, you know, the egg does not have a caterpillar. Remember the verb to be and the verb to have. The egg does not have a caterpillar, nor does the caterpillar have a chrysalis. And this is on my mind because outdoors, my house here, I have a compound for some of the animals, and there's been this remarkably beautiful chrysalis hanging from one of the chain link fence now for a couple of months. We're going through our cold season right now here up in the mountains. And I'm so fascinated as to what's going to emerge from this chrysalis. Anyway, I'm looking out the window in that direction right now. Okay, the analogy. Also, the chrysalis does not have a butterfly. They are, that's the verb to be, they're all manifestations of one entity, just in various expressions. Yes, I know it's formative and one leads to the other. They're not all simultaneous, but in a way you could say they're simultaneously all one thing. You just can't recognize it that way. So egg, caterpillar, chrysalis, butterfly, and the cycle goes on because the butterfly will create more eggs. You know, in the acorn is an entire forest. Information characteristics is a huge debate in biology these days. We won't go there, but here you can see the critical concept of the verb to be and the verb to have. So awareness is consciousness in all its forms or modulations of awareness. Information, the intelligence, energy, the activity, matter, the form. Okay, extending this critical concept number 2 a little bit more. What we're doing here is we're going to use an energy process. We're going to apply energy. Remember, conventional standard, electromagnetism, mechanical vibration, something like that. And using this, we're going to create an information code. This is our way of accessing the information nature of the item via or by way of its expression energetically. This blending, again, we have to be careful to not separate them, to do this reification mistake, trying to turn an event, we're struggling with language here, trying to interpret an event as an object. Be careful about that. So the energetics of the item, what is that? That's actually the information characteristics. This is actually the information guiding the activity. So the information and the behavior of the activity are really one and the same. And both the information and the energy, remember that these are just one event grounded in awareness. Information and communication. This reflects back to not only part 1, but quite a lot to part 2. Remember, part 2 is called compassionate communication. Information is omnipresent, and all processes openly share the information. This really changes an attitude for you and me. It can change our psychological and emotional attitude towards it all. Because you can say that reality actually wants to communicate. It's not, a sticky juice that you have to squeeze out from the fruit of your experience. The experience is forever openly expressing, communicating. The issue is really a lot more as to how to listen, and you could say, if necessary, how to translate all of this into a language, into an appreciation, into a philosophical view that is meaningful to us, is sensible to us. This is the compassionate aspect, that there's a hard to find the words. There's a desire, there's a willingness, a capacity, there's a ready, willing, and ableness to reality that creates this ongoing communication. To use a Vajrayana Buddhism concept, the mandala, some of the teachings try to explain that your ongoing, immediate, everyday experience is the perfect mandala of learning. It's the perfect teaching and learning environment for each and every one of us. Profound concepts. So knowing how to listen, and when necessary, how to translate the information that is omnipresent and openly being shared, this is so much of what we all seek to do. Back to the land of analogy. Okay, let's call this tuning in. You imagine a radio station. It's broadcasting 24 hours a day, every day, and as a radio station does, it's assigned a particular broadcast frequency. Here I've made up one, 101.7 FM. And we don't see it, we don't feel it. We don't even know that if it's there or not. We assume that it's there, but maybe the transmission went down. You wouldn't know it, unless, of course, you have a receiver, something that's been designed to be able to tune in, to resonate, to capture that 101.7 frequency transmission. So it's here. I mean, right now, wherever you are, I'm not sure here, I'm not using a radio. I don't know how many broadcast signals there are right now up here in the mountains, but they're here. If I had a receiver, I could tune in, I could pick them up. But typically, the signals that I'm picking up are far too weak to be useful, so I would also normally, combined with the receiver, have an amplifier that boosts the signal up so that then it can be delivered into a set of speakers or headphones or something, and I could then become aware of the information that is being transmitted from this radio station. Continuing on with the same analogy, let's say that I can do all that, but I'm busy right now. I really want to listen to this stuff, but I can't do it right now. How can I do it later? Well, you can attach a device that can encode the transmission and store it. In the past, it would have been maybe a tape recorder, and I guess they're still around. We don't use the magnetic tape anymore. It's a different process, but the idea is the same. So imagine that you can take the signal that's coming in. It's amplified to the point where now your recording device, which is also an encoding tool, can recognize the signal, encode it, now digitally, and then hold that encoded transmission and store it. And you know, as it's been stored, you can go ahead and get back to it anytime you want. You can hear that broadcast repeatedly. Not only once, but as time, and you can share it with others, and you could even re-record it into another medium, put it in your hard drive, your iPod, or something like that. Yeah, I hope you can see where I'm going with this analogy as we prepare to go into the more technical aspects of part 3, which is the application of energy processes in an effort to encode signals for use in biofeedback. Okay, let's break it down into the 3 steps. I've already mentioned these, alluded to them, but I want to come back to them now and focus on them more specifically, making sure that we have the same concept, that then when I use the terms, that we're having the same understanding. 3 steps: identify, encode, and store. The first thing to do is, in some way, and in this case, we're going to look at applied energy processes. Remember, standard energy, electromagnetism, mechanical vibration, that class, that type, and how we can use this to tease out, to bring out, to make evident, to identify the information characteristics of any particular item. Once we've, I don't know, drawn out or made evident, once we've identified them, then we're going to look at the issue of encoding, or in a sense you could say translating this expression into a useful code, a manner of expression that captures the information characteristics that we've identified. The third step, and these 3 steps are required in information coded biofeedback. The third step is then to store that code in an encrypted fashion so that we can draw upon it, we can get to it, we can use it easily, quickly, almost instantly, anytime we want. And we can use it for a number of things, like assessments, and our stimulations. It goes on beyond that, different forms of analysis, different stimulation reinforcements. But it's the 1, 2, 3. And as you're going to see as we break these down, it's possible, depending on your use requirements, to not have all 3 of these. Once you identify, you can proceed like this or not. For information coded biofeedback, we do. But by breaking these down, I think that you'll have the chance to better understand them. So, as I was saying, in the title of this slide, Using Information Without Encoding, there are some energy processes that are used to identify the information characteristics of an item, but they don't ever really attempt to encode them or even store them. Why would somebody do that? Well, what they're doing is they're wanting to simply, in the moment, typically with the subject in real time, they want to affect that subject, to stimulate that subject, with the information characteristics of any particular item. They don't want to do it repeatedly later. They are very satisfied with having the item and some method of exciting it into an information expression and delivering that, usually through some kind of secondary device, or sometimes just physical contact, with the subject in real time. So all they do is they use the energy to excite the information characteristic and let those information characteristics associated with, you could say, they are the item, right into the subject real time. Different things come to mind here. You know, simply putting, let's say, a homeopathic or a Bach flower remedy, or even going more simply, just putting like a food item or something like that, a toxin, a poison in a vial, in somebody's hand and letting the electromagnetic field characteristics of the organism excite the item and have that excitation from the person's own field bring up the information characteristics that are then absorbed or identified, recognized immediately by the person holding the item. Maybe you know this already. Maybe this is something that intuitively you do all the time. You've just never thought about it in this way. So it can be as simple as that, or it can actually involve a device that has an energy exciting capacity. Let's go a little bit further here and think about identifying and storing without encoding. So you can see the 1, 2, 3, identify, encode, and store. Once you've done the identification aspect of it, how you proceed after that is dependent on what you want to achieve, or the technology you have available, or the mindset of the person you're working with, or your own mindset for that point, your belief systems. So what you can do is you can take an energy process, apply it in order to identify the information characteristics, and you can directly store them without doing any encoding. How do you do that? What does that mean? Well, if you're looking at the screen, you're jumping ahead of me. The easiest example for most all of us is classical homeopathy, where you take some item, something, herb, venom, anything, and you take it into the succussion process. The succussion process is this physical shaking, pounding action that is an excitation process. And of course, yes, you go through the potentization where you can keep doing it and repeating it and distilling it down by either tenths or hundredths, X or C's. And as many times as you want, you end up with a 12C or a 6X, you know. But the idea here is that the information characteristics have been pronounced, have been expressed, have been teased upward or outward by the energy excitation of the mechanical pounding, shaking of the succussion. And these information characteristics are being stored as an imprint in the physical medium. It can be water, it can be water alcohol solution, it can then move over into, you know, lactate pills or creams. In order to reuse the information characteristic, the information code, you have to have the physical medium that was imprinted. That's the good and the bad news, I suppose. It's good because it works. It's bad because if you don't have the bottle of the homeopathy, the homeopathic remedy, you don't have access to the information characteristics, that you can't repeat it again. So here you are, you've done the identification, but you've not encoded it in some kind of encryption process that is then stored. You go directly from identification to storage without the encoding, which is fine as long as you're able to accept the limitation that you have to have the imprinted physical medium to repeatedly introduce the information stimulation into your subject. Identify via energy processes. As we've been saying, and I do, you know, I circle back on this because repetition of critical concepts is important in learning, and making sure that they remain relevant and clear in a presentation is really part of the learning process. So here I am again. The first step is to identify. Let's look at it more clearly, more closely. Information in an item tends to be in our general sensorium, our macroscopic experience of things. It tends to be at relatively low intensity. So the information characteristics are there, but they may be very difficult to identify because of their low intensity. So what we do is we bring in, this is one of the ways, right? We bring in energy, we apply an energy process to the item as a way of helping identify these low intensity information characteristics. They're there, we just can't identify them clearly. That's why we use an energy process. I'm going to present here two approaches to this principle. The principle is the information characteristics are in the item. They are at relatively low intensity states. We need to increase their intensity to be able to more easily identify the characteristics, and we do that by applying an energy process. I'm going to explain two of these processes. They are examples. They're not unusual examples. They're quite common examples in principle. They're used, you know, if they were the only two available, it probably would be fine, although there are others. Here's one approach. Remember, we're using conventional energy concepts. This is electromagnetism. What you do is, with an appropriate technology, you create either a current or a field with, as best as possible, constant characteristics. It's quite stable. How you do that varies. Sometimes you have to set up a certain circumstance to exclude external influences because we have such a rich electromagnetic SPOG environment these days. You set up a Faraday cage, which does a pretty good job of excluding most of these external influences. But anyway, here you have this technology in the form of a device or a combination of devices, and you create an electromagnetic current or its associated field, and as best as possible, it's constant, its characteristics are stable. And you have a monitoring system of that. So if you're monitoring the current or the field, the electromagnetic event, it's pretty boring. It's just there, and you can see it for what it is, and it's there, and it's there, and it's there. Step number 2 is you introduce an item into this current or this field. You stick something into it in one manner or another. And you then watch and see what happens. It's called a perturbation. It's something is disturbing, which sounds bad. Something is affecting, something is altering the constant characteristics of this stable current or field. And importantly, you have to have in your design, technically and also in terms of calculation, you have to have the proper algorithms to know what it is that you're watching, right? But anyway, you note the type and degree of the perturbation of this current or field. Now before, whatever was happening, it basically just doesn't change. Now it's changed. There's a difference. And this difference, Gregory Bateson, a masterful mind in complex systems analysis theory, the whole approach to how things work together. He calls this difference that makes a difference, that's information. Or another of his explanations that I love, Bateson says that information is news of change. So here we have a way of recognizing, of creating and recognizing a difference that has been caused by this particular item. That difference, that news of change, that difference that makes a difference, can be recognized as information characteristics associated with the item. It's a very beautiful approach. Here's another approach. It's different, but the principle is the same, where there is an item that has low intensity information characteristics, and you want to identify them, but you're having a hard time. In this case, you start off with a situation where you have the item, and you typically have some kind of receptacle, box or a plate or a well of a certain material and design, and you put the item there. You have a technical monitoring system for energetic expressions from the item in the well, in the receptacle. Of course, it's extremely important to know what it is that you want to be looking for. If you're looking for mechanical vibrations that could be sonic in nature, and you have a monitoring device of magnetic fluctuations, you made a giant mistake. Right? If you're in an art museum and you're wanting to view the paintings and you just use your ears, you're in trouble. You're not going to appreciate the painting. So in this model, of course, you have to decide ahead of time in your technical design what domain, what aspect of the behaviors you want to look at. Okay, so you've done that. You're monitoring the, let's say, frequency characteristics, and you're looking and looking, and there's nothing happening. It's like, well, the item has no frequency characteristic. Well, so it may, but it just may be that the sensitivity threshold of your technology is just way too high. So what you do is you apply a high energy stimulation. You excite the item with a kind of an energetic kick in the butt. And when you do that, you also have an amplification system in the design so that the excited, in this case, the frequency characteristics, are crossing the threshold of sensitivity of the device and immediately are amplified in such a way that they become clearly evident. Kick in the butt. As these excited and amplified information characteristics pronounce, your monitoring system is recognizing them. Oh, look at this, look at this, look at this frequency, look at this frequency. You know, you didn't see it before, but now you see it. And you go ahead and you catalog. That's a different word, but let's say you store. You catalog these expressed characteristics once they're stimulated. So in both of these cases, the information characteristics of the item are there. They're typically at an intensity level so low that you can't recognize them. You can't identify them. So in one case, you notice how the item perturbs a current or a field. The other is you give it a punch, a high energy stimulation, usually a good excitation with some kind of high impedance filtering. And what crosses the threshold of sensitivity in your device is recognized and then cataloged. You've got the basis for an information code from the item. This is a little bit of a new point as well as a repetition of what I've already said. Any particular item has numerous possible information profiles. And these information profiles or characteristics, they can emerge from the energy process. But you really have to have decided what it was that you wanted to harvest before you set up your design and chose your technology. You can go looking for electric elements, magnetic elements, photonic in the forms of different aspects of light expressions, and also the phonic or sonic, the mechanical vibrations that within a certain range we would call sound. You can take something, I was thinking of this morning, a carrot. I got a carrot, and there are a bunch of carrots, and they're all carrots. So you could take 5 of them and say, is this a carrot, is this a, everybody would say, it's a carrot, it's a carrot. Yeah, but are they identical? Well, you'd say, yeah, they're all, well, maybe not. One's a little bigger, one's a little smaller, one is smoother, one is rougher, one is a little bit more orange, one is a little bit less orange. Those are just, at the overt sensory level. Then you break it down and you might find like maybe they were grown in different fields, where now the mineral spectrum is a little bit different from carrot 1 to carrot 2 to carrot 3. And maybe, one is organic and one is with fertilized synthetics and pesticides. So you find other different molecules. You think, wow, actually these are not the same at all, but they're all the same. In Thailand here there's a famous saying, same but different. We have to recognize this when we create information codes. Following this same thought, if you can glance up at the screen, if you're looking at this and not just listening, you can create an enduring signal representation. You can convert these perturbations or these amplified expressions in a whole bunch of ways. If you're looking at this diagram, for example, you have to decide, well, okay, let's, amplitude. You can see all of these, you know, wiggly, beautiful wave characteristics here. And maybe you're interested in how tall it is, the amplitude. Okay, then your algorithm is monitoring the amplitudes and you know, how high and the change or the rate of change in the amplitudes. Okay. The other, maybe you're interested in the slopes. You know, is it a steep slope? Is it a slow, gradual slope? Or maybe you're interested in the repetitions, the number, the frequencies of this. You see, you can design the aspects of the code by predetermining what aspects of the signal you want to monitor. And this is where the algorithm comes in. This is where the calculation process comes in. You know, maybe you're interested in the rate of change. Maybe you're interested in the degree of change. They're all okay. Some may be more important than others depending on your principle set, but there's so much information all the time. How to select, how much to incorporate or create a complex of the two is a decision in the design process. Like right now, like our body, famously the five senses. You can see something, you can hear something, you can smell, you can taste, you can feel. And normally all of these are going on at the same time, or sometimes we need to isolate. I only want to look. So you maybe put on, you know, sound buffering earphones or something to not have this. You can see where I'm going here. That one particular item, even in the same process, in this case an amplified energy, or pardon me, an applied energy, can end up generating a lot of data. And that data is converted into information depending on the characteristics that you consider important. I hope that's not too confusing, but the point is that, you know, if you have an item and you encode it and you encode it twice, or you encode it in different ways, or use two different algorithms, your information code may not, in its encrypted form, display the same elements. It's like the different carrots, you know, as long as the key elements are there, that is a very useful information code. Let's go on, you'll see what I mean. This is the step-by-step. The information first is identified, then encoded and stored. These days, with the electronics that we have in devices and the binary computing capacity of these devices, it's quite simple, well, relatively speaking. It's easy, I'll say, because what's underlying is not so simple. It's easy to program the algorithms that you've identified as useful, and then to encode those algorithms in binary signals, and to then encrypt them in a fashion to store them. This is one of the things that has been made easier with the whole advent and the continued rapid evolution of the computer technologies and all the related digital devices and processes that surround our lives these days. If you're looking at the screen, what you're seeing is my attempt to make more obvious the fact that a single item can have very useful, very faithful, very effective information codes where the code itself may not be exactly the same, like the carrot example. Here, what you're looking at are 6 photos of arguably one of the most recognizable people of the last century, right? Albert Einstein. And some are black and white, and one is in color. They're taken from different angles. He's looking right, he's looking left. He's younger, he's older, he's standing, he's sitting. There are a lot of variables in these images, which you could say are information codes of a type. And yet, the key, the critical, the core aspects of who this is, they're evident, it's easy, they're all useful. If I said to you, bring me a photo of Albert Einstein, and you did, because I want to show somebody Albert Einstein, we would have been successful, regardless of which photo that you brought me and which photo that I showed. So when you work with information codes that are derived from applied energy processes, because there are different ways of interpreting the application of energy to identify low-intensity information characteristics. And then you choose the algorithm. You know, do you want amplitude? Do you want slope? Do you want frequency? Do you want rate of change? Do you want degree of change? That these are all sufficient to capture the identity, to create an information code that is that item. So don't be fooled or confused or dissuaded by the fact that an information coding may not be an exact replication of another information code, both of which are derived from the same item. Let's look at a few of these theoretical points in more of a real application. There are a number of just brilliant people out there at work recently and currently, and I'm sure in the future. One of them, Cyril Smith, highly educated, highly respected academic and scientist. And he became quite interested in the information characteristics of items. He did a lot of work in this area, and I'm referencing one here that is kind of interesting and also, I hope, a good example. He took thyroxine, which is a thyroid hormone. He took the thyroxine molecule. He was within a very established academic setting, a lot of scientific resource, including medical. He took this thyroxine molecule and he put it through a process he designed, similar to things that I've already discussed. And in an excitation process, he worked at deriving the mechanical vibration, the sonic characteristics, or phonic, the sonic characteristics of the thyroxine molecule in the excited state. And he recorded it, and taking this excited low intensity, identified a signal, amplified this signal up into the audial range, the range that we humans can hear, and was at a conference focusing on all of these issues. And in his presentation, he played over the loudspeakers to the conference audience the information code in sonic form of the thyroxine molecule. Now, this was not a pretty sound. Cacophonous would be a good description of it, a screeching kind of fingernails on the blackboard kind of thing. It wasn't pleasant, but it was the information code in sonic manifestation. Within a short period of doing this, he had to stop because there were certain members in the audience that began to experience tachycardia, the rapid palpitating heartbeats. And Tachycardia is one of the symptoms of an excess of this particular thyroid hormone. As far as these people were concerned, they were experiencing high levels of thyroxine. But there was no physical molecule around. It was the information code. Another example, it's out of Italy. It's a method called transfer pharmacological frequency. This is the English translation. In the Italian, the acronym would be TFF, F for pharmacological there. And what they do is they use a configuration of electrodes and some very frequency-specific amplification, and things like high impedance to filter out certain things, kind of raise the threshold bar. And what they did is they had access to medicines, and they did this process in such a manner to identify the information code, and then to transmit what we'll call here the signal signatures, the information codes of these various medicines. And they transmitted them into, well, in two ways. One is directly into a medium, a host medium. They used water quite a lot, so they imprinted in water. You can see here that they did not encode. They identified and directly transferred the information characteristics into a medium as an imprint, as a way of storing it. They also didn't even bother with the imprinting. In some cases, they sent directly the excited, identified information code directly into a living subject. So they did it in two ways. They used these pharmacological medicines in the process, and they were fascinated, excited to discover repeatedly, over and over again, that they could create the same physiological effect as the medical substance by using the information code. What's even more stunning is, with the exception of one very unusual case that I won't describe right now, but I'll say generally speaking, in almost all the cases, the person experienced the physiological benefits of the medicine, but without the typical side effects associated with that medical substance. That's amazing. Their hypothesis was that in the form of information codes, that the organism, the body, the person, the subject, was able to resonate with the needed and would not resonate with the unneeded, which were typically causations for side effects. That's their theory. A theory aside, the findings were impressive and repeated. In their vernacular, they call these signal signatures, what I call the information codes, they called them the music of the medicine. Very lovely romantic Italian concept. Another example, also coming out of European Italian, the Mediterranean area. Early 1990s, although his work went on for years, Jacques Benveniste, he's an example of so often what happens where the scientific community came down on him so hard because not only his theories but his findings were counter to their belief systems. He had a very hard time professionally as he did his work, and his work became more and more public. That's a side note and a sad story. You can look it up on the internet anytime, and there are some books written about it as well. But the point is that he set up pretty simple systems using electromagnetic coils and amplifiers, and he would take well-known substances, hormones in some cases, and work at teasing out the information characteristics and would transfer these very specific molecular signals into storage systems. He would do all three. He would identify, encode, and store these specific molecular signals, these information codes. And then using a computer, because by this time there's been enough advancement in computer technology, that he would record these, that's the encoding and the storage, and then replay these signals. And he would expose different biological systems, very simple organisms all the way up to more complex, some just at a basic cellular level. He would expose these biological systems that have a very normal, highly predictable, sensitive reaction to the actual or the original molecule. And what he noted is that these biological systems reacted to the signal in the same way that they reacted to the actual molecule. You could say in a sense that they were fooled into thinking, I mean, not the right verbs, they were fooled into thinking that they had been exposed to the actual molecule where they had not been exposed to the actual molecule. They were exposed to the information code of the molecule. There are so many examples, you know, that you have, once you get into the body of information, once you end up discovering one, then the other is just around the corner. These things are not made famously public because they run so much against the grain of conventional thinking. They challenge too many axioms. And of course, there are all sorts of attempts to disprove these things. They conduct counter studies, and oftentimes the counter studies are significantly flawed, but yet they claim negative results. It makes me think of, and I'll paraphrase Margaret Mead, great anthropologist, when she encountered a certain set of facts that were gathered in the field. If I remember the quote more or less, she said, "These are the kinds of findings that I would not believe even if they are true." I admire her for her honesty, but wow. So, back to Benveniste. He went further. He recorded these information signals of the various molecules, things like acetylcholine and ovalbumin, and, you know, very well understood molecular substances. And he emailed these recorded information codes to some colleagues at Northwestern University in Chicago, a highly reputable university. And interestingly, what they did was they took it even one step further. So what the Chicago team did is they took this emailed attachment information and put it through their computer system to imprint water. So this is like, you know, 3 steps removed from the original now. And then they went in and they did tests, well-recognized, reasonable tests using animal subjects with the imprinted water, and found that the imprinted water was creating the same effects as though the animals had been exposed to the physical molecules. So you can see here the emerging message of all of this. This brings us to the end of segment number 1 of part number 3. You may recall that this series in its whole has 4 parts. The name of the series is Signal Encoding Theory in Biofeedback. This is part 3 and segment 1. If you want more information, continued contact and connection, please go to possibilitywave.com. This subject is going to continue in segment number 2. It's the same part 3. So part 3 has 2 segments. We've just finished segment number 1, And segment number 2 is going to continue with the same subject matter, including examples from recent history. Thanks very much. It's been a real pleasure. It's been about an hour and 20 minutes. I hope your time feels to be well spent. Thank you for being with me. Bye-bye.